大家好，欢迎您来到我们这个每个月的社区讲座。我们这个讲座呢是由加拿大华裔投票促进会、反对仇恨亚裔犯罪关注组，还有加拿大国际精英俱乐部联合举办的。我们每个月呢会进行1到3次。那我们请来的嘉宾呢有各方面的人才都有吧，有的是专家学者，有的是前辈。那他们呢给我们带来的很多方面的故事和分享。我们讲座的目的呢，就是希望通过这些故事和分享，让我们广大的华裔社区的成员，特别是一代移民呢，充分的了解加拿大社会、加拿大的历史，还有人文啊、人文环境呀、文化习俗等等。那今天呢，我们请来了Joe呢是生于1930年代，他10岁的时候呢才获得公民权。他是加拿大土生土长的华人，可是10岁才获得公民权。后来当然才成人之后，当然有选举权。但是Joe呢，作为就是在这样的环境中长大的呢，他非常自强不息。他获得了硕士学位，并且呢，他在加拿大的选举局呢工作了35年，所以他有很多这方面的故事和我们分享。那今天为我们担任翻译的呢是 Tim 呢是我们的理事之一。那好，那就时间就交给 Tim 和Joe，谢谢。
Hey, Joe, yeah, I think Ali just made a brief introduction about the talk and your background. So, and
okay.
Yeah, I think you're ready to go. And
okay.
What else?
All right, was first asked to appear on here because I ran the provincial elections back in 1970 all the way to about 2005. But at the time, I couldn't understand why I was asked to speak on this because I was simply running an election. Okay.
对Joe 就说呢，他从1970年到2005年之间就担任这个 BC election 这个选举官，就帮助这个组织这个省选还有一些联邦大选吧。但Joe其实他不太清楚为什么我们会邀请他讲这个话题，就选举这个话题，就对，Joe，
But after I thought about it, if I took into context of when I was young, we had a lot of discriminatory practice by when I was brought up, and the white population didn't treat the Chinese very well before World War II, and I think if I spoke in terms of that, along with where I got to in running an election, it would make it more understandable why I'm here.
所以就是说，这个选举这个话题其实是要跟他的成长的一个背景要联系起来看的。就是说，他成长的一个环境就是在尤其在1950年之前，第2次世界大战之前，白人对中国人、对亚裔的歧视是非常严重的。如果我们考虑到在这个背景当下到后面他可以当上这个选举官，协助组织这个选举，这个巨大的一个差别，就这个话题就变得更有一个时代的意义在里面。
So I am first generation Chinese Canadian, and our parents. All of our parents had to be here before 1923. So this is what you would call 老华侨 1923, because in 1923, Canada passed the Chinese Exclusion Act, meaning no Chinese can come after 1923 to 1947.
Joe 他是在1930年代、1937年出生的，他是在相当于在加拿大出生的第一代华人吧。那么Joe他自己对老华侨有一个定义，就是说在1923年之前到达加拿大、到达北美的这一批中国人，他称之为老华侨。原因就是在1923年到1947年之间，加拿大颁发了非常严厉的排华法案。这期间20多年，几乎是没有中国人可以通过移民的方式进入加拿大。 成为加拿大。对。
So my name is Joe Dang. I was born in Vancouver in 1937, and I was sixth of 7 children. And my father came in 1908 by ship, and it took 6 weeks to make the voyage. And in those days, they went to Victoria because Vancouver didn't have the docks yet. He came at age 26, and he had to pay a head tax of $500 to get into Canada.
周刚也介绍自己，他叫 Joe Dan。Dan 其实是广东话的邓，就是邓小平的邓。他们家有7个小孩，然后周是第6个小孩，就是。那么周的爸爸是1908年坐船过来的，当时他坐了6个星期的船，然后他首先到的是维多利亚，因为当时温哥华还没有一个比较大的一个港口可以停靠这些船。他爸爸来的时候是26岁，然后他1908年的时候是付了500块钱的人头税。
When I asked my dad why he came, he said because China was in a lot of turmoil at the time. This was the Qing dynasty. They had just gone through 2 opium wars with Britain in 1850 and 1855. The Taiping Rebellion happened just after that in the 1870s. And then the Boxer Rebellion happened in the year 1900 in Beijing.
对周就问他爸爸为什么你要到加拿大来，然后他爸爸就说当时的中国就是清末的时候非常混乱，就是有先后经历了2次鸦片战争，然后1870年的太平天国运动，到后面的1900年左右的义和团运动，所以当时是民不聊生的情况下，他们才决定到加拿大来。
On top of all this, evidently there was so much turmoil that there were bandits, roving bandits, all over China. People were starving, so they got in groups into armies, and they would simply rob the population, the farms, and steal from anybody just so that they can eat. And this was the state of China at the time. It was just bad news.
所以周就说当时的情况就是非常不好，土匪然后盗贼然后财产没有得到保证，然后饭都可能吃不饱，然后在这种情况下，人们才会想组织起来想办法离开这个国家。
The Qing dynasty at that time was picked on by many different countries. During the Boxer Rebellion, they were taking the territory. Russia was taking territory. Germany was taking Japan. And it would make Empress Cixi pay heavy indemnities of silver just to leave China alone. It was called, it was just bribery, just to leave China alone. So they were paying them.
对，然后他说，当时清政府就是受到列强的侵略吧，包括德国包括俄罗斯这样的帝国主义国家，然后慈禧太后也是只能割地赔款，然后就是借得片刻安宁嘛，就是说，就是整个国家的状态是在很混乱、很不好的一个状态下。
Most of the immigrants to North America were from the Guangzhou area, the Pearl River Delta near Canton. And they were all coolies or laborers. They were not educated because things were just terribly mixed up at the time. And because of the state of the country, many of them were not educated. So most of the immigrants that went to Singapore and Malacca Strait came from Fujian province. So they sort of crossed. The Fujian went westward, and the Cantonese came to North America. It's called chain migration. One go and the rest follow. Okay.
对，然后周也是举了2个方向的一个移民的一个方向吧，一个是从广东就是珠江三角洲广州附近的这一带的移民，他们是主要到北这边来， 然后另外一个方向是从福建他们出发，他们是往新加坡、往马六甲海峡、东南亚那个方向去。那这些移民都是没有机会受到教育，所以他们能从事的工作都是苦力这样的劳动力这样的工作。
So my father, when he came here, landing in Victoria, he worked in Butcher's Garden. That was before it became a garden. It was simply a rock quarry. And what they did was they blasted the rocks to make cement. So my father lived in a tent for 2 years, blasting rocks, and he was getting paid 12 cents an hour. He was working 12 hours a day. And he said it was so dangerous, a lot of the Chinese were getting killed because they were assigned the toughest jobs.
对Joe 就说他爸爸最开始到维多利亚的时候他是在Butcher Garden， 我想现在应该很多人都知道这个很出名的一个花园，就是布查花园。那当时布查花园还不是一个花园，它其实是一个采石场，就是他们把矿石采下来，然后再运到水泥厂做成水泥。可想而知，这个采石场其实工作是很危险。他爸爸住在一个 tent， 就是一个营地或者帐篷里面住了2年，然后就负责爆破这个石头。他的工资是非常低每个小时只有12分钱，然后每天要干12个小时，非常危险的工作。然后有很多工友也因为这个原因受伤、工伤去世。
Okay, so he came in 1908, and by 1911, he went back to China on an arranged marriage, got married. Then he came back again in 1912, after a year, and he became an apprentice in the tailoring trade on Fort Street in Victoria. Now, when he did this, there was no pay. So he did this for 3 years, sleeping on the tables just to learn how to be a tailor.
然后他爸爸就在1911年的时候结束了他那个采石场的工作，然后他回到了中国结婚，然后在1912年的时候他又重新回到维多利亚。那这一次他没有继续他那个采石场工作，他找了一个裁缝店，他开始当学徒，然后他做了3年的学徒，然后没有工资，然后就是为了学一门手艺，然后也睡的地方就睡在一个裁缝的桌子上。
So in 1923, that's when the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed by the government, and no Chinese could enter Canada after that, except the people who were already here that went back to China, and they'd have papers to come back. So this created another problem. Some did not want to come back. Some died. And what happened was that those papers were now sold to people who wanted to come over. These were called paper sons.
对，周就解释了一个非常特有的一个时代的一个产物，一个名词吧。就在1923年的时候加拿大政府通过了排华法案，也就是说没有新的中国移民可以再进入加拿大了。那当时就是有一些已经在加拿大的中国人，然后他们可以回中国，那他们就会持有一些paper， 就是一个相当于签证或者是护照这样一个证件，就保证他们可以再重新回来加拿大。那这些人回到中国之后，有一部分人他可能不想再回来加拿大了，或者有一些人就可能在中国去世了。那同时在中国的人也还是有想去加拿大的人，那他们怎么办呢？他们就会找这些人把他们的证件买过来，相当于买了一个伪造的身份通过这个方式然后进入加拿大。
Now these paper sons would have to pose as the person of the papers that they own, and they would have to study all the details of the person's home that they purchased. because when they got over here, the immigration officers would really grill them to make sure they knew they were the kid, they were the person that they said they were. They would say, how many light bulbs do you have in your house? Where's the door to compare to the house, compare to the bedrooms and so on. So they had a really tough time, and they would spend a lot of time grilling these people to make sure they're the ones that they say they are.
那么这个通过买子就是伪造身份，然后进入加拿大这种途径，这种人呢，他就要做很多的学习，就是他必须得完完全全的了解就是他买的这个人的身份、他的背景、他的在加拿大的各种情况、他的家庭因为他入境的时候，移民官会非常非常仔细的去拷问他，就是包括详细到就说的，就是有多少个房间，哪个房间有多少个灯泡之类，就是非常严格的一个审问的过程，入境的审问过程。
Now you have to understand that the women weren't allowed to come. That's why the Chinatowns in those days were all men. It was called the bachelor. It was a bachelor town, and but with the passage of the Exclusion Act, many men gave up bringing their families over. As a result, they would get married over here if they can find a wife, and so they would have two families. Such is what I had. I had another family in China and never met it. And because my father purchased my mother to get remarried here.
就是说当时的排华的法案的一个情况，一个更不好的情况就是说中国女性就更无法就是进入加拿大了。那当时已经到加拿大这边的有相当多劳工都是男性的劳工，整个唐人街就相当于一个单身汉的一个俱乐部，就是一个大本营，聚集了相当多中国男性。那在这种情况下，很多找不到结婚对象的中国男性只能在加拿大当地结婚，然后就出现了这种情况，就有一些在加拿大这边拥有一个家庭，然后同时在国内也拥有一个家庭。然后周的情况就是他父亲的情况，其实也是这样，他父亲在国内结婚了，有个家庭，然后在加拿大这边也是一个新的一个家庭。
Now, my mother had a different case. She was sold twice. Once in 1913 at age 8, she was sold to the Joe family in Victoria to become the servant. She came over on the ship, the Tamba Maru, along with another woman, age 18, who was coming over to get married. So as she came over in 1926 with her younger brother, the younger brother, which is my uncle, died on board ship.
周刚刚说到，就是他父亲跟他母亲结婚，其实是他父亲是把他母亲买过来的。但更特殊的是，其实他母亲其实是被卖过2次的。他第一次被卖的时候是从中国卖到加拿大，当时是1913年，他母亲才8岁。他被卖过来的原因是，他其实是作为一个陪嫁的一个丫鬟。当时有另外一位女性是18岁，她是要嫁过来给在维多利亚的一个周家。然后他母亲只有8岁，是作为一个陪嫁的丫鬟过来，然后同时跟他母亲一起过来的，其实还有他母亲的弟弟，也就是说理论上是Joe 的一个舅舅，但很可惜的是他的弟弟在船上旅途中就已经过世了。
Now, so my mother was sold once to the Joe family in Victoria at age 8. And then sold again to my father to be a wife. My mother was illiterate both in Chinese and in English. She couldn't read anything because she was never educated. She was she was just a servant to the family, period. And it was not unusual in those days for the women to be sold because my first wife's mother was also sold. She was kidnapped in Hong Kong and then sold over here. So it was a common thing in those days.
然后周就说他的母亲因为是8岁过来，然后其实他中文他是在广东过来，中文也不会说，英文也不会说，就是他没有这个读写的一个能力，就是没有上过学。他被卖过来也是纯粹作为一个佣人，就完全没有受教育的一个机会。然后周又说到，就是这种把人或者尤其是女性买卖这个情况，在当时是非常普遍的。周的第一任妻子，他的妈妈也是从香港被绑架，然后再卖到加拿大来。
Now, when you talk about Chinatowns, there were Chinatowns everywhere in North America, well, in the world, actually. They were necessary because when the Chinese immigrated, they were always poorly treated, so they had to stay together as a community to survive. They needed somebody to be able to write letters. They need somebody to cook. They need somebody to do the laundry. So as a result, they need somebody to be the doctors. So as a result, what happens was that they had to stay together. And if you drive around through North America, you'll find there are old Chinatowns in a lot of the small towns everywhere.
周就说在当时的话，唐人街是非常普遍的，就是北美各地都有非常多的唐人街。出现唐人街的原因，其实他说也是非常可以理解，因为所有这些中国劳力苦力，他们需要聚集在一起，就是互相帮助，然后他们也需要各种服务，比如说得有人给他们写信，得有人给他们煮饭、洗衣服，包括医生看病之类的，就是这样一个小的一个社区形成一个团体，互相帮助。
The Chinese were discriminated on mainly because they were very visible. Don't forget the Qing dynasty made the Chinese wear pigtails in those days. They were always paid about half of what the Europeans got when they worked here. They were picked on, they were murdered, they were robbed. And it was, that's why they had to have Chinatowns, all right?
另外一个原因就是说，中国人特别容易受到歧视，尤其在当时的情况下，就是中国人特别显眼，就是尤其清末的时候，男人还留着一个辫子，老外一看就能看出来你是中国人。然后他们受到歧视，比如说工钱只有其他西人的工钱的1半，所以他们很多时候受到欺负，然后甚至有更严重的有抢他们的钱，或者说是甚至有谋杀这样的情况。这也是为什么唐人街存在的一个原因，可以得到一个保护。
So the difference between the Chinese before the 1950s and now, the Chinese before 1950s, like me, descendants of the Huaqiao, the parents were all coolies. They were uneducated. They came because they were desperate to stay alive. The people coming in from late 50s to 60s, now you have to qualify by having a certain amount of wealth. You have to invest. You have to have a profession. So that's the difference between the Chinese then and the Chinese now.
对，周说到就是说，当时的移民跟现在的移民，就是说1950年之前跟之后的移民，也有很大的区别。就是说，最早的那批移民很多就是过来当苦力，他们就是为了活下来才来到这里。那后面的移民包括我们现在的移民，很多是要经过层层的筛选，符合各种条件，或者是职业移民，或者是投资移民，就是有这样的条件才能进入加拿大。
So by 1947, I was 10 years old. And that's when I became a Canadian citizen, even though I was born here. because the Chinese Exclusion Act was repealed in 1947 by Prime Minister Mackenzie King.
周就说，直到1947年，也就是说他已经10岁了，他在加拿大出生10年以后，他才变成一个加拿大公民。当时是，对，不好意思，1947年，对，当时的总理把这个排华法案撤销之后，他才变成一个加拿大的公民。
So all of us first generation Chinese Canadians, we asserted ourselves very well during World War II. A lot of them served for Canada, even though they weren't allowed to join. So some would go into the other provinces to join up with the Canadian Army. Others would just persist. Others would just get trained and not get posted. But in the end, somehow or other, a lot of Chinese Canadians did serve World War II, and we served ourselves very well. And that's why the Exclusion Act was repealed and we became citizens.
就说到这个排华法案为什么会被撤销，其中一个很主要的原因就是在第2次世界大战的时候，第一代在这加拿大出生的华人，他们的表现非常的优秀当时其实他们并不允许被吸纳进入军队，但是他们还是踊跃的加入军队，就是有些在 BC 省不能加入军队的，他们跑到别的省去加入，有些是虽然加入了但是或者没有得到训练，或者得到训练之后最终没有被派上战场，但最终是在第2次世界大战华人发挥了很大的作用也就是这之后加拿大政府才决定把这个排华法案给撤销掉。
So the Chinese in those days were allowed to go to university, but they could not become a professional. They couldn't practice. So in other words, you could practice medicine, but you couldn't become a doctor. They wouldn't give you a license. You couldn't become an accountant. You couldn't be a teacher. You couldn't be a doctor. You couldn't be a nurse. So we were very limited as to what we can do. And therefore, we were known to have restaurants, farms, grocery stores. That was what we're known for in those days, because we could not do the professional careers.
还有一个情况，当时的一个歧视的情况就是说华人可以去上大学，可以学你想学的专业，但是学完之后，他们并不被允许就是进入这个行业，就是你可以学医，但是你没法真正当医生，你也可以学会计、学护士、学各种，但是你做不了这些职业。也就是因为这个原因，所以华人能够从事了还是比较低端的，或者说是没有太多含量的英文要求的这些行业，比如说餐馆或者是农场杂货店这样的职业。
So most of us in Vancouver would live in the Chinatown ghetto. We were bounded in an area because the people would not rent to us outside that area. So most of us didn't leave that area very much. We would, gradually move out a little further all the time. We would be the last to be served in lineups. If we go to the department store and there's a huge lineup, the Chinese would be the last to be served. The Fenger Aquatic Center used to be called the Crystal Pool. That was the only indoor pool in Vancouver. Chinese were not allowed to go in it. There were restaurants called the White Lunch. I think there were 3 of them in Vancouver. Chinese not allowed. There was a theater next to the Army and Navy down on Hastings and Carroll Street. The Chinese were allowed in there, but you had to sit in a certain section. You had to sit either in the balcony or on the right. If they catch you sitting in the middle, they kick you out. There were certain areas that if you try to go to the border, the immigration officers would interrogate you. They'll pick you out because you're Chinese. So that was life in those days for us.
对，然后周伟说了在当时还有很多歧视的情况，就是 华人主要住在唐人街附近相当于一个贫民区这样一个地方。然后一个原因就是他们在别的地方房东不会租房子给他们，然后慢慢的华人才往唐人街为中心往外扩散。当时还有其他歧视的情况，包括如果是任何排队的服务华人总是排在最后一个得到服务。有一个叫 Crystal Pool 的一个当时唯一的一个室内的游泳馆华人也是不允许被进入的。然后还有一些餐馆就是只有白人才能进去吃饭，中国人是不被允许进去吃饭的。就说至少有3个其中。然后还有一个剧院，就是就会说，就是说中国人在某些位置比较好的位置是不给中国人坐，不给中国人看的，就是中国人好像只能坐在右边或者是第2层，就是靠后的位置。还有就是，如果你去一些出入境之类的，然后你会被出入境的官员反复的审问，就是也是一个歧视的一个行为吧。
Now, all of us Chinese Canadians in those days, we all went to Chinese school every day after public school, every day, including Saturdays. And then August, we went every day. The problem was most of the immigrants were from the Guangzhou area, and they spoke the village dialect. And it was very harsh Cantonese. And the Hong Kong people would laugh at us. But anyways, so with that kind of language, and we learned the formal Chinese at school. At home, I'm speaking a different dialect. So you get totally confused and you're wondering what's going on. So being Chinese in those days was a detriment. We tried to be as white as we can be in order to get ahead.
周就说，其实他们小时候都有上中文学校而且上的还挺不少，就是每天上完这个公立学校之后，每天下午，包括甚至星期六，他们都会去上中文学校。然后暑假的时候，整个8月份每天也都去上中文学校。但问题就是他们上的中文学校应该是以香港的标准的一个粤语作为教学的。但是他们当时很多人其实是从广州附近的地区包括很多侨乡之类的，他们说的话其实可能相当于土话吧，或者说是方言吧，跟广东话其实还有区别，就是所以整个情况就是他们在学校里学的跟他们在家里说的还不太一样，所以挺混乱。另外一种情况就是说，其实当时作为他们觉得自己作为中国人受歧视，其实学这个中文好像好处也不大。他们其实从某种角度讲，他们其实更愿意向白人靠拢，就是减少自己得到的歧视。
Like the Qing government at that time, who used appeasement to fend off the bully countries, we too, as kids, were taught to turn the other cheek when we're being picked on. They would pick on us, white people. They'll call us chinky Chinaman. They'll call us slant eyes. They'll push you around. They'll make you go to the end of the line. But what we do is we turn our cheek and we just walk away, and we can't fight back because we're not supposed to fight back.
对周就是联系到他当时的处境，就像清政府一样，就是一个非常懦弱的国家，就是受到列强的侵略，只能采取这种绥靖的这种政策。就是他在加拿大当地的话，如果有别的西人小朋友欺负他，他也只能是说就是打不还手，就是骂不还口，然后笑笑走开这种情况，就是所以很无奈，就是。
So gradually, after World War II, when we got our citizenship, we started to make inroads into the white territory. We can now sort of live further away from Chinatown. I remember the first Chinese to work in the city hall, the first Chinese to be a teacher. So myself, I didn't get to university until 1955. So that's almost 10 years later, right, from the Exclusion Act. So now is the second part of my talk is on how I came about to getting to where I got to.
终于说到在二战以后慢慢的华人得到这些机会，可以从唐人街往外扩散，进入一些白人的区域，然后华人也慢慢的进入这个主流的社会，包括有第一个华人进入 City Hall 就是市政府工作，然后有他周自己是在1955年，也就是大概排华法案结束的将近10年吧之后才进入大学的。那么下一部分周就会讲这之后是什么样的情况。
So from not being a citizen until 1947, we weren't allowed to vote. We suffered discriminatory practices. I began to teach in 1961, and by 1970, I was in charge of an electoral district. And it's kind of ironic because we weren't even allowed to vote, and here I am running the voting. Not even knowing what a ballot looked like, but I ran the voting in 1970.
对周就是说，从最开始的话华人甚至都没有投票权。那他自己呢是在1961年开始在公立学校当老师，然后到1970年开始，他就开始在选举中做这个选举官的工作。所以这是一个巨大的一个转变吧，就是说他从连选票是什么样子都没见过，然后到后面他自己担任这个选举官这个工作。
So in 1961, I got my Bachelor of Phys Ed at UBC. 1969, I got my Master's of Education at UBC. And 61, I started teaching secondary school. I was the only Asian in the staff of 80. And by 70, I was in charge of the Vancouver Hastings Electoral District for Elections BC, which I ran during the summer of 1970 before I went back to school again in September.
周就讲他是当时是1961年毕业，然后69年的时候他就拿到他的硕士学位。70年的时候还有刚刚有一点忘了，就是说他在刚开始教学的时候，他们学校有80个教职员工，然后他是唯一一个亚洲人。到70年的时候，他就开始负责这个 BC 的这个选举当时他负责的区是温东，就是 Hastings 这一块。
Okay, my work both at the elections and at Hansworth Secondary School, where I was teaching, was noticeable enough that they allowed me to hang on to both jobs at the same time, even during the school year. So when an election was called, generally they're not in the summer, the school board gave me permission to carry on my job as a counselor at Hansworth Secondary School while running the election office, because they installed an extra phone in my office so I could do 2 jobs at once.
对周就说到，就是当时他其实还在继续他的教学的工作，就是说相当于他有2个工作吧，因为当时1970年的省选是在夏天举行的，就是说他完成了那个选举的工作之后，他到9月份他又回去学校上学了。然后他说到学校就非常通融，他允许他同时在2份工作之间就是同时兼顾， 然后甚至还在学校里面给他配备了额外的设备电话什么的，给他支持他做这个选举官的工作。
Now, running the election office is I'm not working for a party. I'm working for the Elections BC, the main office. So we're more or less free to make sure the elections run properly. We take the nominations of all the candidates. We have to set up all the polls at the schools, at the churches or community centers. We have to train all the poll officials, up to 500 people. We get the ballots printed. We have to find an office to rent. We have to rent the full poll facilities. We have to get the furniture. We have to supervise all the counting at the end of the day. We have to organize the advance poll. In other words, the whole constituent for running the election was up to me. And I had to hire an office staff of about 10. And don't forget, I was doing my job while I was at school. So I did all this and still run the election from all the way, and I didn't quit until 2005.
周说到就是首先这个选举官这个工作其实可能有些人不太了解，就是他不是真正的自己去参选，就是他不是一个候选人，他是一个相当于一个裁判官的一个角色，就是他们主要负责的是组织这个选举。组织选举的工作就是其实还蛮多的，就是他讲到的首先比如说要接受这个候选人的提名，然后监督他们，保证他们就整个选举的过程是符合这个流程、符合这个规矩的。然后他得在各个社区中心学校、教堂设立这个投票站包括这个组织这个提前投票，然后他还得训练这个现场的这个选举的这个人员至少有大概500个选举人员，然后得打印这些选票，得租场地，然后得准备这些设备。当然最后最重要的还得在选举结束之后还得数这些投票，所以整个工作其实是蛮繁重的然后我们还别忘了，就是周同时还是在学校在中学里面当辅导员他有比较繁重的教学工作，所以他得身兼这两方面，而他做这个选举工作一直持续到2005年，就是非常非常不容易。
So this job was very complicated, very demanding. You have to work under a lot of pressure because you only got a certain amount of time, and you have to do a lot of things at the same time. So that was the election job, and I was doing that at the same time as I was working at the school. So from here, I'll take questions, I think, Tim.
对，然后周就在简单的说，就是说这个选举的工作，因为它总是时间非常短，在这个短时间内要把同时很多事情做完，然后同时他得兼顾学校这方面的工作，所以压力还是蛮大的所以他主要的就介绍完了，然后看大家有没有什么问题需要提问的。
大家如果有问题呢，可以写在聊天区，然后这样的 Tim 也可以翻译。谢谢 ，Thank you, Joe。
对，大家可以不方便说话的可以 chat， 可以打字，就是可以对。
Oh, you want me to add the Chinese was finally able to get a serve as a member of parliament. That was Douglas Jung in 1957. So that was 10 years after the Exclusion Act was taken off. Doug Jung enlisted in the Army in 1939. And but they wouldn't assign the Chinese to fight but he finally got in 1944 to fight in the war. But the reason why they didn't want the Chinese fighting in the war was the politicians did not want the problem of giving us paying us the citizenship after we served for Canada. So that was a problem for the politicians at the time.
对的，周还讲到就是说Douglas Chan 就是郑天华，就是是华人的第一位华人的国会议员，就是他是在1957年当选的，也就是说排华法案结束10年之后才当选。他的背景是主要他在1939年的时候，二战期间他加入军队，但是他实际上真正上战场，一直等到1944年才有机会上战场。当时的政客不愿意让华人参军的原因，其实就是不想华人通过这种手段，然后获得选举的一个权利。
The further on Douglas Jung, the Veterans Affair of Canada, which is the body that looks after veterans of the war, they provided money to Douglas and the other Chinese veterans so that they could go to university and get an education. So Doug Jung graduated with a Bachelor of Arts and a law degree in 1953. He's finally called to the bar in 1954. And so by that time, we can now have Chinese lawyers. And by 1960, remember I told you about the paper sons? In 1960, the Canadian government provided an amnesty program for all these people who bought papers, the paper sons. They came here illegally. So the government says, if you want to admit that you did wrong, we will now forget it. You can now become a citizen and clear your name. The problem was a lot of these people had already had this new name in their bank accounts and their wills and in their houses and everything else. So they didn't want to change anything. They just left it. So that's why the amnesty program was okay, but it didn't give the desired results because people didn't want to bother changing.
对，周还讲到就是这个关于郑天华这个一些后续的，就是他在参军回来以后，他得到这个老兵协会的一个资助，包括他还有一些其他的中国的一些军人，他们就是得到资助以后可以完成他们的大学学业。周当时是在1953年，他拿到2个学位，包括一个法律学位，然后1954年他就开始当律师，那这样华人就开始有这个华人的律师。那到1960年的时候，政府有一个大赦的一个特赦的一个项目，就是关于我们之前说的一个 paper son 这个只生仔这个伪造文件进入加拿大这个情况。但当时的情况其实很多人也并不是说特别理想吧，因为当时很多人已经用这个伪造的身份或者这个不同的名字，然后包括他们的银行账户啊、遗嘱啊各方面，其实都用另外一个名字了，所以再让他们把这个名字改回来，其实也挺麻烦的。所以这个特色也就是说只是一个象征意义上的一个特色吧，就是实际意义上，所以这些人也没法真正去改名字了。
Now, if there are no questions, I was wondering if anybody out there is interested in knowing how I got to be electoral officer. That's kind of an interesting story too. Anybody?
Actually, I think we got one question in the chat.
Okay.
So I think you're asking when you first got into the elections BC, do you feel like there's any like systematic discrimination or any kind of discrimination at all? Like, how do you feel about that?
Since I got in?
Yes, yeah.
No, none at all. You know, the Chinese, we work harder, we work better than anybody else. Let's face it. And when you want to hire somebody, you hire a Chinese because we do a better job. When I was on the staff at school, they would come to me and say, hey, you know, here's a problem, because they know I'm going to do something about it. And it's kind of interesting. I don't think they know it's a Chinese trait that we work harder, but I know that. So no, there's no we're good. As soon as we get in there, they know we're going to do the job.
就周的回答其实还蛮有点意外，就是他说他其实他不太感受到这个系统里面有对他的那个歧视。那最主要的原因就是周他本身是一个非常勤奋工作的人，然后别人也信任他，把工作交给他，然后因为他们也想知道，他们也想招到一些能干活的人，周就是真正能干活的人。包括在学校里面的时候也是一样，就是大家有问题找周，然后周总是能想到办法把问题解决了。所以从这个角度来说，他不觉得他自己受到歧视，所以他觉得在这个里面还挺好，挺受重用的，就是。
You want me to tell you how I got my job in the first place? Let's put it that way. It's kind of funny.
Okay. I guess you have to save it for now. So I got another question for you.
Okay, good. Okay.
Yeah, there's Oliva. I think she's interested in the job of like a election officer. Like how do you get, like, how do anyone get into this job? Like how can they get hired as a election officer? I guess kind of similar to what you want to tell us, but
all right, yeah, well, similar. Okay, you apply. You simply apply. You go online, and they have job openings. So, but that was since 1950 when the act was changed. You apply to get the job. They'll go through an interview process. They'll vet you. They'll go through the references and so on, and then they'll pick the best person. But this is where I was going to talk to you about how I got the job in the first place in 1970. The act in those days, you didn't apply. It's who you knew. So in the act prior to 1990, it said that the MLAs would choose who gets to be the district electoral officer. So if you knew a person in a member legislative assembly, then they could give you the job, and you could have people there that are terrible, didn't know anything, and they could still have the job. So it was who you knew at the time. So when I got the job, it wasn't who I knew, it was who my brother knew. So at the time, I was only, 35 at the time, 30. I just finished my master's degree, and I thought, okay, I've got a summer off because I'm not going to school anymore. And my brothers, remember I told you that in those days, stores were your laundry, your grocery, your restaurant, your farmer. Okay, my brother was laundry, all right? So his laundry dry cleaners was next door to an establishment called Grace Florist. Now, Grace Florist, the owner of that was Grace McCarthy. She ended up being the assistant premier of BC. So at that time, she was an MLA. And so she was looking for somebody to run the election in Vancouver East. So she asked my brother. Of course, my brother didn't have an education past high school. So my brother simply said, why don't you ask me? So that's what they did.
Right. 周说到我们先回答这个 Oliver 的问题吧，就是说 Oliver 说这个选举官这个工作是怎么进入，怎么得到的？现在的话包括1990年之后吧，你只要在政府网站上申请，然后就像一个正常的工作一样，到选举的时候，它会有 job opening，就是开放给你申请，然后你提交你的简历，然后他 check 你的推荐人之类的，然后跟正常申请一个工作的流程是一样的吧？也就是说，什么人都可以去申请。那周想说的就是，其实他最开始进入这个工作是1970年。那当时的情况其实还蛮有趣、蛮特殊的，就是跟现在不一样。当时的进入这个工作其实不是说你一个正规的一个申请、一个选拔的一个过程，是取决于你认识谁，就是当时的选举官其实是MLA 省议员这样，他们各自指派的。那其实周自己本人其实也不认识任何政客或者是议员之类的，认识的人呢其实是他的哥哥，他的哥哥呢就是开了一个店，就是大家可能知道华人开的几种店之一，就是他哥哥开的是一个洗衣店，呃，然后洗衣店的隔壁有一个花店，花店的老板呢，McCann McCarthy 当时是副省长还是助理省长然后他要出来参选，那他就想找这个选举官去帮他，那他就找到周的哥哥周的哥哥呢，他只有高中文化，开洗衣店的，他也不懂，然后这很自然的这个工作，后来就落到周的身上了。周当时是33岁，完成了他的硕士学位，然后暑假学校也没有太多事情，然后就机缘巧合，他就进入这个选举官这个职业。
But an aside to that, so if the party in power can decide who gets a job, that means in 1973, Grace's party lost. So that means I should be out of a job, right? But what happened was that the other party, the NDP, saw how I did the work. And so they were impressed. So they also asked me to do the job. So from then on, it didn't matter who won the election, I was it.
对，可能大家听周这么解释完，其实也知道，就是说他这个既然是一个政客这个候选人指定的，所以多多少少是有一个倾向性的就是说指定了谁，可能就会帮那个人去选。但实际上情况是1973年他这个隔壁花店这个老板这个 Grace，他们的政党没听错的话，其实他没有选成功，所以当时的另外一个政党 NDP 就觉得这个州办事还蛮靠谱，还挺公平公正的，所以在下一次选举的时候，他们又找州来做这个事情，所以从此以后，无论哪个政党选，他们都觉得选州没有错，就让他来当这个选举官这个角色。Let me check the questions now. I think we've got a couple more here.
Sure.
I'm not sure you know about that, like, or you realize about that, like, Joe, like, ever since the COVID pandemic and Chinese Asia, they seem to receive more discrimination or like kind of COVID discrimination.
Oh,
Yeah, I don't know if you realize that as well. And do you have any suggestion on that? For us, the newer generation, the newer immigration here.
Well, we worked at the. My wife is currently active with Election BC, and she worked through all the elections over the COVID, and I cannot recall that being any question or problem. If there is if there's an issue there, I'm sure she would love to hear about it and find out what was the issue. And because she's in charge of the district from Chilliwack to Burnaby, and so she contacts with Victoria quite often. So whoever has experiences with that are difficult with discrimination, we sure love to hear about it.
I guess, yeah, it's kind of not related to the election itself. Like, say, I'm not sure you heard about the term like Chinese virus. You know, they like Chinese virus or China virus, like the COVID virus. They kind of try to blame it to Chinese, you know, that kind of discrimination, you know.
Oh, oh, that brings me back to my young days. Didn't so? You just turn your cheek and forget it and just keep going. Yeah. Oh yeah. You'll get those all the time. So you still get it. Unfortunately, it'll take generations. It'll take hundreds of years before all that will go, because we're a visible minority. You can't help that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah， 就是刚刚有个问到，就是说新冠歧视这个，我不太确定我解读对不对，就是可能把这个新冠这个归咎到中国人，然后产生了一些相关的歧视那周说到就是说这个东西就是不是我们一代人能够解决的，就是歧视这东西它总是还是会存在，可能需要我们其他人的努力去慢慢去改变这个东西，然后你不能强求每一个人都没有歧视。然后我们只能自己做得更好吧，就是Let me check the next question. If you can see the chat, you can actually read it. You have worked in the education system. Do we have any organization for developing curriculum in order to introduce more about Chinese culture?
Outside of the giving Mandarin classes, you know, I feel that yes, there should be more on the curriculum for Chinese immigration, for example. And what we went through as a population, because that'll open the eyes of a lot of people. But the way the education is set up, I don't see that as being a possibility anywhere in the near future. I would say eventually, way down the line, I think there could be. It's like the native Aboriginal lessons now. See, that's just coming on, but that took 100 years, and I would say the same thing would happen with Mideast, the Iranian people, the Persian culture, or whatever, the Hindi culture. I think we would all like to get it in somehow as an elective, I would suppose. But I can't see that coming anywhere near, at least not in our public system. It wouldn't be. It may be private school. But speaking on that, I think even our own Chinese population hardly knows the Chinese history. That's what I find. So never mind the Canadian population, right?
对，就说到这个中文课或者中国文化这个教学，然后在加拿大这个系统里面存在这个问题周自己认为确实有这个必要，就是考虑到有这么大量的中国移民中国人在这边但是确实在现在的这个加拿大这个教育系统里面，可能还是比较缺失吧他举例说，比如说像原住民的这个教育，也是最近才被纳入这个公立教育这个系统。那包括除了中国人之外，还有各种其他的印度各种种族 那么他们同样有这个诉求，所以说要体现这种各种文化在这个公立系统里面，可能是有一个过程的通过一个慢慢一个改变的一个过程吧。所以据他所知在公立学校里面是没有太多这个中国文化的代表啊、就是需要这个过程去慢慢的一个通过各种方式，包括选票这种方式，让各个族裔的这个文化，如果想在公立学校里面得到一个体现、一个传承的话，对。Okay, next question. Okay, it asked, Zhu Hong asked why establish Chinatown and Chinese school. I think you kind of explained why the necessity of having the Chinatown, and Chinese school. Like maybe we can talk about a little bit more about like how they come, why you guys have Chinese school at the time or
Why were there Chinese schools in Chinatowns?
yeah.
Oh, well, I explained that there are Chinatowns because the people had to gather together to survive because a lot of them were illiterate. They were all laborers. They needed doctors. They needed letter writers. They needed cooks. So that's why there are Chinatowns. And the Chinese schools, I think during my time, there were 1, 2, 3, up to 4 different Chinese schools at the time. One was run by the Chinese Freemasons. One was run by the Wong Society. I don't know, the other 2 were private ones. But we had to go because that was the thing to do. Don't forget, these were coolies that came over from China. And when you're in China, education is a necessity. If there's a school, you got to go. So we had to go.
对就问这个为什么有唐人街或为什么有中文学校这个问题唐人街他刚刚讲到，其实就是说，因为当时来的这批华人劳工苦力，他们都没有受过教育，不认识字，所以他们得抱团在一起，包括找人写信然后有医生看病然后所以唐人街的存在是帮助他们作为一个避难所很有必要的。那中文学校的话，我记得当时至少有4个不同的中文学校吧，包括有一个是皇室中青会吧举办的一个学校，就是说从他们的上一代是作为苦力来到加拿大的，然后在中国的传统里面受教育是非常重要的，所以举办这个中文学校，让他们的下一代就是能够识字，能够保持中华文化，然后都是非常重要，就是不要像上一代一样，然后目不识丁，然后没有文化。对。Okay, I guess one more question from C Ping. I want to know the stories of how Joe could get a good job. Like I think you mentioned you're the one of the only Asian of the 80 teachers in the school right at that time. Like how did you get in? How did you get a good job?
It's I'd have to say volunteering and doing a lot of work for nothing and no pay helps a lot. You got to get your reputation out there that you're reliable, that you can do the job, and then people start noticing you, and that's when they take you on. If you expect to finish a course and graduate and jump into a high-paying job right away, forget it. It's not going to happen. So when I was at university, I was heavily involved with the athletic department at UBC meaning I stayed at nights, weekends. I helped run games, sold tickets, whatever, referee games. It was so much so that the whole faculty knew me. All the professors knew me. And it got to the point they even gave me a parking pass, which I shouldn't have, but as a student, but I had a faculty parking pass. That's how much I got into it. So once you build that reputation up, they know you're reliable, they know you're good. So anything that comes up, they say, hey, Joe can do it. So that's how you do it. You got to do a lot of extra work, enjoy doing it, show what you can do, and then it'll come. Almost guaranteed.
OK， 对，周讲到就是他个人的经历，他是怎么得到一个好的工作的，就是他是说你从做义工开始，你要做很多事情，就不求回报的去做，然后慢慢的你就可以积累你的信誉，然后大家知道你是一个可靠的人，你确实有这个能力，你值得信赖，如果你说你想从大学一毕业，然后马上出来就找到一个很高报酬的工作，这几乎是不太可能的，就是有一个积累的过程。他举了他在大学里面的例子，周是学这个体育教学的，然后他当时在他们的学院里面就做了很多事情，就是包括各种组织各种活动啊，然后卖票啊，当裁判啊，然后就以致所有的教授都认识周了，就是都知道他这个人很能干，就是做事情很靠谱。就是最夸张的就是周甚至在学校里面还拿了一个停车位，就是校方给他一个停车位，就是作为学生他其实不应该拿，但就是对他一种奖励吧，就是说就是觉得这个人确实办事很靠谱，就是做到这个程度，积累到这个程度，然后大家都知道你这个人靠谱，他们就愿意把事情交给你。这样的话，工作自然而然就会来找你，你就自然而然能够得到好的工作，好的回报。
Tim, it's actually making contacts, getting yourself known, making yourself a reputation. That's what makes it.
对，就是不断的跟人联系，然后不断的让人知道你能做什么，然后展现你的才能，就是这也是非常重要的。就是
那好，是不是没有其他问题了？
I don't see any more questions in the chat, but yeah, if anyone want to speak to Joe, like don't be afraid.
这个也是我第一次，这个真的是活的历史故事啊！听到有人这样讲自己的故事，以前我们这样的故事都是 read from the book. So Joe, so you give us a very vivid story about your own experience. 我声音是不是太小了，听？所以我是
稍微有点小，对
，sorry，
对，
所以我是很感谢周能分享他的这样的鲜活的故事。那时间也不早了，如果大家没有什么问题呢，我们就可以到这儿结束。如果有问题呢，也可以在群里继续提，我们再回馈给周，然后以后也可以请他再做其他的讲座。Tim， 你还是麻烦你来翻译吧。
Yeah, I think yeah, I just talk about like say we normally don't get such chance, like we read a lot about history on the books and on the internet, but we don't actually get the chance to speak to one like you, you're like a real life history, like a living history, like we really appreciate that, like you join us tonight, and we learn a lot from that, and about history, about like especially those before the World War II, and it's a long history, and yeah, so appreciate that love sharing all these to all of us, and yeah, and we look forward to to join us again and in the future, and yeah.
Oh, no problem. Yes, actually, I am somewhat surprised when I talk to people from the mainland, sometimes I find I know more Chinese history than they do for some reason. I don't understand why, but maybe it's, I don't know what is taught in China, but when I retired, I started digging into Chinese history because I wondered why my father came. And when I started looking into it, I started looking into Chinese history because it was a turmoil. That's the reason why he came. And why was there turmoil? And I kept going and kept going and kept going. And anyways, I began to buy so many books in Chinese history. It was expensive. So you're right. Yes, I'm appreciative of my background and the Chinese history and how everything ties together. But that's how I got into Chinese history, because I was wondering why my father came when things were so bad here. Why would he come? Well, things were worse in China. That's why, right? And it's kind of interesting.
对，就是讲到历史，就是周说他就是追寻历史的一个原因，就是他想知道他爸爸为什么会来到加拿大，然后就是基于当时的历史，然后清朝清末这个情况，然后他是退休以后才开始去研究这些历史然后一个比较有趣的一个情况就是他发觉就是很多中国大陆来的人可能就对历史的了解可能还不如周这个土生土长的加拿大人就了解得多，所以也是一个比较奇怪的一个现象吧。I think I got one more question on the chat. Like, you want to share about your story about your Christmas show, like the village show? Like, yeah.
Oh, Tim, yes. I have a video that I was going to send to you this Christmas. My wife of 16 years, 17 years, I don't know, since 2006. She is a Christmas specialist. She has collected things for Christmas 20 years before I even met her. So we have an indoor display in Coquitlam that is open to the public, that has been open to the public ever since 2007. We have busloads of students come during the day. We have busloads of seniors come during the nights. We open all day, well, for the public from 6 to 9 at night. And when during the COVID time, we took private viewing. You can have 1 hour private viewing so that you're there by yourself or with your own family. So we don't spread the COVID. So I'll give Tim this video and the phone numbers and the emails. So if you wish to join in, this is quite a spectacular display, I have to admit, because even the rest of North America often comes up to see it here, from Texas, from California, Chicago. So I will give Tim the information and you can disperse it somehow. It's an indoor Christmas village display with millions of lights, millions of moving parts, and we have started working on it since the beginning of October. So this will be ready at 1st of December.
对可能 OK 对，可能对，刚刚有些人可能不太没有听到，就是周他是住在高桂林，然后他就是完全是义务无偿的，他有一个关于圣诞的一个展览，就是他每年都会举办，应该是从07年开始吧，然后他的老婆呢，就是非常喜欢收集关于圣诞的各种小东西，就是各种灯啊、各种房子啊、圣诞老人啊。然后周每年从10月份开始就会把这些 装饰布置在他的车库里面，可能家里也有一部分吧。然后就非常欢迎大家，就是可以去Joe那里去看。然后前几年因为是 COVID 的原因，所以得预约，然后所以就是大家可以单独的时间去看，就避免这个 COVID 的原因嘛。那今年的话应该是没有之前是有专门的 bus，就是学校学生或者老人就是一整车的人会到他们家的车库去参观他这个展览，完全是免费的。然后州是完全是义务的做出来这个展览，就是呃就就不大不小，但是确实是很值得一看。包括北美各地，德州芝加哥都有人会专门过来看。如果大家有兴趣看这个的话，就非常愿意把这个联系方式，他会把 video 发给我，我可以把我的联系方式或者州的联系方式发到 chat 里面，然后在高桂林的朋友或者在温哥华哪里的朋友都欢迎再过来看，在12月1号就会开始这个展览。对couple more questions.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. As actually people ask you, do you have any published, like you have books or you have published? Like,
Yes, I do, but it's I tell you, I don't have books published. I don't know how to publish it but I started writing my memoirs when I retired, and this is going to be a long one. And what got me started was my first wife. And my first wife, Xing Feng, became ill in 1973 with Lou Gehrig's disease. And Lou Gehrig's disease, you are supposed to die within 3 years. So my wife lasted 20 years, but she was totally incapacitated. She was in a hospital, just laid out right out. And so anyways, but the interesting thing was that we carried on doing things that we shouldn't have been doing. We still took her on holidays, took her vacation. We still took her camping, believe it or not, to go and travel. And it was in a wheelchair, and I had to spoon feed her. And so that's when I started writing a book. I said, I got to list that down for my memoirs, because even my children couldn't remember it, because they were only 3 and 6 at the time. So I had to write it down. So that's one of my first books. Then I started writing one on my father and his head tax and how he had to work so I had to ask him, and my mother, how she was sold twice and so on and so forth. So I had to get that all down. And so then one thing led to another. Now I'm writing things on, what am I writing on? I don't know. I'm writing on our Christmas, our village, how that came about and so on. So none of these are for sale, but if you like a copy, I don't know why you want it, but anyways, you're welcome to have it. Just send me a note and I'll get one to you. I'll list down what I've got, and you can borrow it or just take it or whatever.
对周说到，就是他确实有在写书但是不是说这种公开发表或者是拿来卖的书。他写的都是他关于他个人、他家庭的书。然后第一本是跟他第一任太太的关于他第一任太太的书吧，就是很不幸，他第一任太太得了一种非常罕见的疾病就是渐冻症当时他是1973年患病的，医生的判断是他可能活不过3年，但是周在背后付出了很巨大的努力，他太太最后活了20年，然后跟普通的渐冻症病人还不一样吧。然后他的太太包括2个小孩，然后继续做各种 正常该做的活动，比如说去旅游啊，去露营啊，然后他觉得这段生活是一个蛮美好的回忆，然后他在退休之后就把这个写下来作为第一本书。第二本书是关于他的父亲，就是为什么来到加拿大，然后关于他的母亲怎么被卖了2次，然后就是他自己想知道，然后他也想给啊、后面的后面的人，就是有兴趣了解的人去了解。这是第二本书，然后现在第三本书，然后可能题材就更广泛一些，然后他可能开始写一些他正在做的关于Christmas 这个 show 这个展览这个活动，有任何有兴趣的读者或者是观众，然后欢迎就是联系周，然后周也会或者给你或者借给你，他非常乐意分享他的书给你们。这个书其实不是卖的，就是他自己兴趣爱好写下来的。
Hey, Tim, I'm writing these books because I'm 85 and I got to get these things down before I can't, right?
OK， 对，最重要的就是他觉得他想留下那些书，因为他写下来就人老了之后做一个回忆吧，就是。
还有
Okay,
Emily
and
讲，对 Emily，
yeah,
Joe
yeah,
you
there's
can
one,
read,
yeah.
go ahead please Tim.
Yeah, I think Emily just sent out a note to everyone. Like she's working in a local publisher, and if Joe you're interested in publishing, and you can contact them. I think it's called Hancock House Publisher.
Oh, really? Okay, Hancock. All right. Okay.
Yeah,
I don't know. I don't know.
I think we should consider that.
I don't know if it's worth publishing, but anyway, so you can have a look at it, see what, right? It's a pretty good story, but I don't know about my writing.
Okay. Yeah, I think we should definitely consider that, and it's about the story, it's not about the writing, right?
Yeah.
那好的，时间也已经到8点半了 ，Tim， 所以我们这个
Okay.
也不要太长，怕周太累了。
Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. Go ahead, please.
Okay, I think we all had a good time tonight, and thank you so much, Joe, and thank you everyone for joining us. Yeah.
Okay. See ya.
好的。
Thank you. See you.